Everybody, welcome to the Lore Masters podcast, one of the best podcasts on planet Earth. I hope everyone is doing well today. I have the anti-tracker with me, as I always do. Sir, how are you doing?
I'm sick.
Well, that's an easy fix. Just stop being sick.
Okay, I'll do that.
Yeah, you just stop. So while we wait for people to come in and get the alert that this is occurring, just a couple of things I always tell you guys about. Don't forget to check me out at twitter.com/lore reloaded, facebook.com/lore reloaded. Really exciting stuff starting next week. We'll be partnering up with Perfect World again. And we'll be doing not only videos on this channel, but also on their Twitch with tons of giveaways. If you're a huge Star Trek Online fan, definitely want to be there, 9 p.m. Central Standard Times on Sundays. So let's talk about the elephant in the room. Really awesome stuff. 10,000 subscribers. I can't really believe it. I think that is awesome. Anti-Tracker, don't you agree? That is awesome, sir.
I would agree that it's 10,000.
You always make it seem bad in front of our friends. But today we're going to be talking about a couple of things. If you guys haven't, check out the community tab, because every Saturday I do a vote where people get to decide on what we'll be discussing for the Community Friday choice. Interestingly enough, I did Operation Return, which is when Starfleet retakes Deep Space Nine from the Dominion, and the Prime Directive. And this is a first. They're virtually tied. It generally stays 33-33. So if you want your opinion heard or seen, definitely go there and click, because by Wednesday, whoever's winning at that point, I'm going to go with. But I thought it would be fun to kind of give a sneak peek of where I'm at, especially with the Prime Directive. Michael, you and me have been talking about this a little bit. Mm-hmm. For me, when it comes to the Prime Directive, there are two interpretations of it I think we see, and I would love for people to give me their opinions on this, especially in the chat. But there are at least two interpretations we see. So in the original series, in Deep Space Nine, and in Discovery, of all places, I think we see one interpretation. And then in the Next Generation, most of the Next Generation, most of Voyager, and most of Enterprise, even though the Prime Directive doesn't exist in Enterprise, we see echoes of it. We see another extreme interpretation. And so, Anti-Tracker, I'm going to give you my opinions, high-level view, and then you can tell us what you think, and then people can go and vote if they want me to expand on my opinions. Sound fair?
Sure.
Okay, so the original series itself, I think, is the more pragmatic interpretation of looking at it. So for all intents and purposes, the Prime Directive is something extremely important, something that can be a career ender, but ultimately it is a rule that you can still use your brain around. So we see in the original series, we see in Deep Space Nine, and we see in Discovery, where they break the Prime Directive, but because they're using their brains and they're doing it in a way that makes sense, it's not as revered, and it's taken in a different way. Whereas if you take a look at the Next Generation, it has, for all intents and purposes, become a dogma or a religion of sorts. Now, it's not completely a religion, but honest to God, the more I watch The Next Generation, the more I watch some episodes of Voyager and Enterprise, it's almost like watching current day politics between like feminists and anti-feminists, or Republicans and Democrats. And here's an interesting piece to me, and I don't think the writers did this on purpose, but there is a correlation here. In the original series, in Deep Space Nine, and I think with the context clues in Discovery, we see a more prevalence of religion, of the existence of religion, whereas in the Next Generation, in Voyager, and Enterprise, not so much. Enterprise, I don't really feel like they go into it all that much, but definitely the Next Generation, and somewhat in Voyager, we see a refusal of religion, how humanism or atheism, how humanism is much more prevalent and is better. How we've moved past all these ancient and archaic religions and this just stupid way of thinking. Now, I'm going to pass it off to you to get your thoughts on this, but before we do that, this discussion is not going to necessarily be relevant to what people believe in real life, but how it's written in the story.
Right.
And regardless of what's presented, it doesn't mean there is a God, it doesn't mean there isn't a God. Just because in the next generation they don't believe that a God exists and they make the Prime Directive their own religion, doesn't mean that there is a God. It's bad writing, in my opinion. So I just want to get that disclaimer. Anti-Trekker, what's your opinion on that?
Well, the basic gist of it, I think you're correct. But I wouldn't necessarily call the Prime Directive a religion in the next gen Voyager Enterprise shows as much as, and in fact, Picard himself called it a philosophy. And in fact, while you were talking, I was looking up on Memory Alpha some stuff about the Prime Directive, and in the episode of Next Gen Symbiosis, Picard is quoted saying the Prime Directive is not just a set of rules, it is a philosophy, and a very correct one. History has proven again and again that whenever mankind interferes with a less developed civilization, no matter how well intended that interference may be, the results are invariably disastrous. Which is a load of crap, number one, but because if that were the case, then Picard should be completely against Bajor being admitted into the Federation because they're not as developed. You know, they're warped, but they're not as developed as, say, the Federation. But the flip side of that is Kirk. When you look at the way that it is in the original series, the Prime Directive is treated as a law, not a philosophy. Right? The Prime Directive, I mean, Kirk does take it seriously, and the quote that he's most famous for is from the original series episode, The Omega Glory, when he says that a starship's captain's most solemn oath is that he will give his life, even his entire crew, rather than violate the Prime Directive. It's considered very serious, but but it is a specific law under specific circumstances. So when they were dealing with, there was an episode in which there was a pre-warp civilization that was native to this planet that was worshiping a computer system, not knowing it was a computer system that they called Vol, and their entire existence was designed to simply keep this system running. And Kirk said, we have to put a stop to this. And when he was questioned about violating the Prime Directive, he very quickly pointed out that the Prime Directive is about interfering with the development of cultures, but this culture was stagnant and not developing. So that's a very important point in the Kirk era, that where if somebody said that to Picard, he would talk about how, they're crazy because, they're just going to end up destroying these poor innocent people. Now, Voyager, I think, takes it to the ultimate extreme, where Janeway does treat the Prime Directive like it is her religious belief. And some of the stuff in there is just nonsensical. The idea that, for example, if the natural progression of a species is that, they're going to destroy themselves because of nuclear war, and you saying, and by the way, this did happen in a Voyager episode. I know you know this, but just so that your viewing audience knows this. And Janeway takes the stand that, the Prime Directive says we can't interfere, so we got to let them destroy themselves.
And isn't that the one? Hold on, I want to make sure they can hear me. Yeah, isn't that the one where she's having an argument with Paris, and he says, she brings up, we can't know what's going to happen, and Paris says anything's got to be better than this,
right.
And she just pulls rank on him. She doesn't even counter it. She just pulls rank on him. Yeah.
And that's the stupid thing. Is that if you want to say, hey, we shouldn't interfere because we don't know what will happen, That's a sound enough concept, but at the same time, if you do know what will happen, and what will happen would be disastrous if you do not interfere, well, then it becomes stupid to hold on to that position just because you want to.
Right.
And that's where I have such a big problem with the Janeway / Picard interpretation of the Prime Directive, is that even when you know that violating the Prime Directive would yield a good thing for all parties involved, you still want to hold on to it based on this moral principle that whenever we interfere, it's bad. And I think that does come back to the political agenda of Roddenberry, and basically trying to say that anybody imposing their will on anybody else is always circumstance.
Right.
But from a pragmatic perspective, that's not always the case.
Right. You're going in and out a little bit, by the way, just so you know. So Don Juan brought up an interesting point. And again, I'm not going to go too much into this, but pretty sure the Prime Directive doesn't discuss any type of God. Laugh out loud. So let me put this out there for you. The Prime Directive, as interpreted in The Next Generation, as interpreted in Voyager, is to say that we're not going to interfere in anything that occurs in nature or anything that occurs overall, because there might be because anytime we interfere, we might be interfering with natural events that may be better. That what we decide is good might not be good, and to naturally let it happen because there might be something better that occurs versus us interfering. So you start putting nature or events above yourself. I sincerely believe, and again, if you want me to expand on this, you're going to need to vote for it. I'll do it at some point, but I won't be doing it this week if it's not voted for. But I firmly believe that the Prime Directive, as interpreted in later episodes or later series, turns it into the belief that there is something greater out there that we can't understand, so we shouldn't interfere. Let me ask you this, Anti-Tracker, and then I think we'll move on to other things. By the way, he's going to be doing a very cool episode, very cool video, Jim Hadar versus Borg. Me and him have been talking about it a little bit. If I agree with it, I should probably start playing this game too. My people I'm playing with probably getting mad, but you should check that out. Me and him have talked about it. I don't know that I completely agree with him, but he has some really cool ideas, so definitely check that out. But do you think the addition of humanism in The Next Generation kind of informed how what we see with the Prime Directive and its different iterations, or do you think maybe that was just the way it turned out? You see what I'm saying? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that it's a combination. I mean, the fact that Gene Roddenberry had more creative control, I don't know that there's a cause and effect here as much as it's kind of a natural consequence of Gene Roddenberry having creative control over a series. Roddenberry very much wanted to project a communist atheist utopia. That was what his original idea of Star Trek was, and obviously that concept wasn't going anywhere, especially in the 1960s. And so, thanks to the studio executives, we got what we now can call the original series. Now, in Next Gen, he actually had some creative control. So now he could start doing his communist atheist utopia. And so the problem is that if you take away, and this is an inherent problem with writing in general, but sci-fi in particular, is that if you want to try and take away the concept of a higher power, the concept of a god, the concept of some absolute, then you have to throw something else in its place. You have to have something by which to judge the standard of morality for these people. And so in Trek, it became the Prime Directive. It's not that the Prime Directive mentions God, as one of your viewers was asking about. It's that the Prime Directive is God in the eyes from the perspective of the Federation in the later Star Trek shows. It is the religion of the Federation, is the Prime Directive. And in fact, I know, the last comment that I see on there was about the temporal Prime Directive. That's just an extension of it, and that's just say, oh well, we're going to take it one step forward because we've never mentioned rules about time travel, so all of a sudden there's a retcon temporal Prime Directive, but it's really just the same thing. Don't mess things up. Don't interfere. So I do think that they take it too far. And I know Don Juan was saying it's more of a law than a religion. No, it's supposed to just be a law. That's the thing. That's the problem. Is that I would agree with you, Don Juan, if we were talking about the original series. But, Picard even lays it, a religion is a set of philosophical beliefs. And Picard flat out calls the Prime Directive a set of philosophical beliefs.
Right.
So it is a religion.
And its tenets can be used against you and seem as heresy. Look at the episode Drumhead.
Right.
Where what does the quote-unquote antagonist, bad admiral woman, do? The one thing she brings against him that is supposed to just destroy him, and you can even see that he sees it puts him in a bad spot, is to say, you broke the Prime Directive 12 times. You went against our core beliefs. You went against God.
Not to be all sweaty nerd on you, but it was 9 times.
Yeah, well, okay. I mean, that's fine. But you see what I'm saying? That's exactly, I guess, my point, is that I agree that it's supposed to be, it's very important. It can be career ending. It's something that, as Kirk said, you could die for.
Right. It would be akin to, in the modern military, it would be akin to desertion or treason. I mean, it is absolutely the most serious breach of the law that a starship captain could commit. And that's how it's treated in the original series. But, nobody thinks of treason as a set of philosophies. To be a traitor, it's pretty easy to determine, whether somebody is a traitor or not. And you have to prove intent. You have to prove, certain things to show that someone is a traitor or a deserter.
Right.
With the Prime Directive, as well as at least in the way that it's portrayed in the later shows, it's like, it is treated like heresy. If you're just accused of violating the Prime Directive, you're a bad person. And and look, like, especially with Janeway, where she gets on her high horse about how they can't violate the Prime Directive. It's the supreme thing in all the universe, and so we have to let all these innocent people die.
Right?
Really? That's the prime. So the law is let them die, because I don't think that's what the law says. The law says you can't interfere with the natural progression of a pre-warp species.
Right. So go to the community tab. If you want to hear more about this, great. If you just want a breakdown of Operation Return, again, I'll be doing both of these at some point, but this week it's going to be one or the other. Never been this close. Voting will go until Wednesday night, 9 p.m. Central Standard Time. And Operation Return will probably be about 3 to 5 videos because there's so much information there. And the Prime Directive will probably be 2 videos. So if you're interested, definitely go take it out. Go take a look. If somebody still wants to talk about it, I will bring it back up and we can go back to it. But let's move on to R-rated Star Trek. Star Trek. And you and me kind of disagree on this. I don't like it because I don't see Quentin Tarantino as a good director for Star Trek. That's not to say he's not a good director. That's not to say that he can't make great movies. But I don't think that I can see him as a good director for Star Trek. Because when I think Quentin Tarantino, I think Discovery, honestly. Maybe perhaps he'll be a little more true to form, because it's my understanding he's a big fan. Right. So I think he might keep continuity together. But I think questionable, possible rape scene. I think gore, like we say. At best, I think sex/gore scene mixed together. I think that's very Tarantino. I don't think that's Trek. That's just not what I would consider Trek. And so I think that's what we're going to get with Tarantino. And I just, again, I'm not saying that it's not Star Trek or that you're not a real Trekkie or Trekker, that you can't be a fan and like his stuff. But for me, I think it moves too far away from what we see. Now, from my understanding, you're a little bit more hopeful. You're on the fence, right?
Well, I'm of two minds with it. On the one hand, I at least in part agree with you in principle, in that Star Trek up until Discovery has always been a family-friendly show. And while it's dealt with heavy issues, it hasn't dealt with it in such a way that you couldn't watch it with a preteen or teenager.
Right.
And until Discovery. And the thing is, when Discovery does go for the quote unquote adult content, it just throws it in there completely gratuitously. I mean, it's stupid. The Klingon nude scene and the F-bombs served no real purpose in the course of the episode, except to say, look at what we did, which is the very definition of gratuitous. So I did not approve of it in Discovery. That being said, Quentin Tarantino, as graphic as his movies are, they're not gratuitous. Quentin Tarantino is one of the best filmmakers of adult content film in the modern era. I love Quentin Tarantino films. And so this is why I'm kind of torn, because on the one hand, do I think that fits what Star Trek is supposed to be? No, I don't. On the other hand, I would be very curious to see a Quentin Tarantino Star Trek film. But I just, I would very much like to see what his vision of Trek is. I don't know I know that Tarantino is reportedly a big fan of the show, which is great, but I don't know which show specifically. Like, was he a next-gen guy, or did he like the original series? Based on his nostalgia for the 60s and 70s, I would hope it was more of an original series thing. But I don't know. I haven't heard enough from him on the subject of Trek. And, for people like Don Juan, I have to respectfully disagree with you. Don Juan was saying, oh, the F-bombs are fine. They were just used in a dumb fashion. No, they're not fine. Star Trek is not supposed to be an adult show. And I know that a lot of people don't understand this, or they can't wrap their heads around it. But, there is a difference between an adult show, a family show, and both of them can be really, really good. That's the thing, and they deal with subject matter in different ways. One is geared towards adults, one is geared towards a more general audience, hence, PG or PG-13. And Star Trek has always been something that, you can sit down with the kids. I'll tell you, and this is absolutely true. I can remember two things from when I was very, very young. One of those two things is watching the first man walk on the moon. The other of those two things is watching Star Trek with my parents. And both of those happen to be in the same year, by the way. But Discovery? No, that would be completely inappropriate. And the whole thing with Tarantino then turning, and when they just said, oh, Tarantino pitched an idea for Star Trek, I was like, oh, cool. And then the second story comes out, oh, he insists it's R-rated, and I face palmed. I'm like, why does Trek have to be R-rated? You're killing it. Not that the studio hasn't been killing it already, but with Discovery, but we're just going down the rabbit hole, I guess.
Well, and I take a slightly different point. I think that if it changes, it can change, but it's not. It's different. It's reimagined. It's not what it was, and I do wonder if that won't destroy it, because I understand that movies did well. A lot of movies that were rated R did well, what was it? Dude in a Red Mask. You and me watched it. We both enjoyed it, which is rare for us to agree on movies.
What, Deadpool?
Deadpool, yeah. And I think a lot of them are trying to rekindle that, and I just don't.
But you see,
I don't think it works for all genres.
But you can't use Deadpool as an example anyway. As John Campia put very, very well on his podcast, is that that's using the rule of exception. Deadpool was an extremely successful R-rated movie. However, you're ignoring the fact that there are 14 other comic book films that were rated R that did not do well.
Right.
And so Deadpool is the exception, not the rule. And so I don't know that just because Deadpool did well, yeah, you can do it. But the reason Deadpool was successful was not because it was R-rated. It was because Ryan Reynolds was absolutely going to stick to the source material and make a movie about what made Deadpool so popular.
Right. So do you think they're going to try to reboot I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, well, one other thing that I do want to point out here is that I was just looking up Tarantino's record as far as box office. And honestly, he's had 3 movies out of all of his films that broke 200 million. That would be Inglourious Basterds, Pulp Fiction, and Django Unchained. All 3, they're fine movies. But keep in mind that for a Star Trek film, that's not gangbusters at the box office.
Right.
If we look up, let me look it up real quick. Star Trek Beyond, which was considered a horrible flop, had a box office take domestically of 343 million, which is more than Inglourious Basterds or Pulp Fiction. All right, so they're great movies. I'm not knocking those movies, but you can't make a Star Trek movie on the budget that you can make a Django Unchained.
So, Paths Unwritten, let's discuss that. I don't think Tarantino would make a good sci-fi, but get over your own preconceptions of what Star Trek needs to be.
It's not what Star Trek needs to be; it's what Star Trek is.
Well,
that's let me point something out here, because I know a lot of people, that we get into these weird fights about this kind of stuff, and I was defending Man of Steel for this very similar ideas, is that people complain that it's not Superman because it's not their preconceived notion of what Superman's supposed to be. However, this Man of Steel was in a new universe for his character. This was not the same character from the prior Superman films. Tarantino is looking at doing a direct sequel to Star Trek Beyond. This is not going to be some new Tarantino universe. This is just another episode in the existing Star Trek universe.
Okay, I didn't know that. I was about to ask, do you think they were... Well, I think it's more nuanced than that, honestly, and you'll probably disagree with me here. But even with the information you gave, anytime, I think if the license, the IP holder, makes something, then that to me is whatever the license holder is, or whatever. So Discovery is, whether we like it or not, Star Trek. It is.
Right.
What Quentin Tarantino makes, should this go through, is going to be it. But I do think that if he makes it like Inglourious Basterds, it's going to fundamentally change it, and I do think is going to ultimately hurt it. Having preconceived...
not.
Let me get my thought out real quick. Having preconceived notions isn't, or perceptions, isn't necessarily a bad thing. To say something is the way it is and say that this is a move away from it, and in your opinion it's a bad thing, that's not bad. So when people talk about having preconceived notions or what you think it should be, that's okay. I don't understand why people get upset about that. But just to take it to the other side too, if people like the new stuff, then that's okay too. For instance, I like Battlestar Galactica Reimagined. That is Battlestar Galactica for me. There are quite a few people who don't, who like the original and think that it was a heresy and abomination.
Right.
But for me, if you say Battlestar Galactica, I think Reimagined. So I don't think either side can get too mad at each other. I think both sides have legitimate points, I guess is where I'm going with that.
Well, and what I was going to say is that now one thing I completely acknowledge is that it is entirely possible that Quentin Tarantino produces this film and hopefully directs the film, because I know that that's one of the things that's kind of up in the air, is whether or not he would end up directing. But let's say, but if he does, if this is his story, I would want to see him direct it. And let's say it's the greatest Star Trek film ever made. Sure, it's R-rated. Sure, it's not what the old school fans like myself appreciate about Trek overall. But it's an awesome film. Great. If it's an awesome film, I'll enjoy the heck out of it. I'll buy the Blu-ray. I will watch it over and over. I'm not going to say, oh, well, I'm not going to watch this filth just because it's different than I expected. And quite frankly, that's why I think a lot of people hate the Abrams films.
Because it's different?
Because it's so different, yes.
Right.
And the thing is that the Abrams films, yes, is it more action-infused in the original series? Sure. But that doesn't make it bad. And if you look at, the exception of Star Trek Beyond, if you look at the themes and ideas in both Star Trek 2009 and Star Trek Into Darkness, they're not bad films. They're not even dumb films. They're just a reimagining of those characters. But like we were saying before, as far as, well, they had a precedent for why things were different. The timeline had been altered, so this is a different version of Kirk.
Right.
And so I'm fine with that. What I wouldn't be fine, and one of the problems I have with Discovery is not that, Discovery is different and therefore bad. It's that they're trying to say that Discovery takes place in the same timeline as the original Kirk.
Right. Prime Universe.
Yeah.
I think I've even said that. If it's reimagined, then I don't necessarily have a complete problem with Discovery.
Right.
So, yeah, again, because there was something that someone said. Discovery is canonically Star Trek, but it isn't Star Trek in any other way. You can't just slap deltas and nacelles on something and call it Trek. Well, tell Axonar that. Because they learned out the hard way. You can't do that. Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything necessarily. I think you make really good points. I guess we're just going to have to wait to see what he wants, because no one really knows what the idea is. Have you heard anything on what he wants to do yet? Or not really?
No, that's the problem, is that the only thing that's known is that that Quentin Tarantino pitched an idea to J.J. Abrams. J.J. Abrams loved the idea. Paramount commissioned a writer's room, which was very quick for them to do this, because this whole thing happened in a week. This is very fast timing. And also that Tarantino insists that the film be R-rated. And apparently Paramount is okay with that. That's about all we know.
Right.
So I know Don Juan keeps wanting to hate on J.J. Abrams, but keep in mind, J.J. Abrams put a seal of approval on the Tarantino idea. So you may not be as happy as you're,
right.
You seem to be pretending to be here.
Yeah. Well, it wouldn't have happened without JJ, right?
JJ, even though JJ is currently working on Star Wars, he's still also a big part of the Star Trek universe, which is kind of interesting. And I think that's one thing that people didn't like about J.J. Abrams and his take on Trek, is that it felt a little more like Star Wars. And, the simple fact is that Star Trek and Star Wars are still very different, even if the Star Trek was more action-y and more special effects driven than it was in the past.
Right. Yeah, again, just until we get more information, there's not a lot to do or really discuss on it. How are we getting spammed with porn here?
Yeah, I was trying to figure out what he's talking about because I'm watching the live stream. I'm not seeing any porn. That's
meeting for oh, it's this person. I will.
Oh, you got somebody to
block. Got him blocked. Yep. Block. Cool. I've never gotten rated before.
That was one of the producers of Star Trek Discovery right there.
Look at our new and improved. Go right here. Wow, they found a way around the system. That's interesting. Anyway, so I guess that kind of segues pretty well because, again, there's not a lot to the Tarantino. I hate what a lot of these channels are doing, and I probably should go help my people. I hate what a lot of these channels are doing because a lot of the lore channels or a lot of the Trek or Wars specifically is just jumping on and being like, oh my god, look how awesome this is. There's not really enough information beyond what we know specifically of...
yeah, we have very little to go on right
now. So you can't even make an entire show of that, I think. But I think it does segue. And again, if you guys have have any more thoughts, I'll bring it back up. But moving on to Marvel versus Star Wars versus Star Trek. Which is better? Which is doing better? The thing I don't like, and what makes this somewhat hard, is I don't think you can be as objective when looking at who's doing better and who's not. And that's because CBS seems to be doing very, very well at hiding their stuff. So you can't really tell, is X doing better than Y, because we can't see the numbers with CBS. Right. I wonder if that's a little bit on purpose, to be honest with you. But in your opinion... just looking at the series, who's doing well in just a breakdown, if you had to look at it, including the movies, including the series, all of that good stuff?
If you're talking about you're specifically talking about Marvel, Star Trek, and Star Wars, I assume you're leaving out DC because everybody knows the DC universe is kind of falling apart at the seams.
Well, you want to know what's sad is when I thought about overall just who's doing better, those were the three that popped up. I didn't even consider DC. Right. Not as a slight or anything. It just didn't come to mind. I mean, we can include it if we want to.
But part of that is because the DC universe is completely imploding right now with, Justice League being as horribly put together as it was.
Right.
It's funny because, and this is something I've been talking about a little bit on my channel, but I would say both Marvel and Star Wars are doing extremely well. And... I know that you're already getting the comments from people about how horrible Disney is, but you know what? Disney is not an evil empire. Disney is doing things exactly what they should do, which is they buy these companies, they finance these companies, but they let these companies do what they do well. Marvel movies are not Disney Marvel movies. They're just Marvel movies with Disney bankrolling. The Star Wars films... granted, there are some things I take issue with the new Star Wars films, but that's not because of Disney. And in fact, if you look at the thing that bothers me about the new Star Wars is the direct gender and racial politics being thrown into it, admitted by J.J. Abrams. And I don't like that. I don't think that kind of thing is appropriate. But at the same time, that had nothing to do with Disney. That was not Disney saying, hey, we need more women or something. No. That was entirely on J.J. Abrams' plate, not on Disney. So Disney is an incredibly smart company and they're the kind of company you want at the helm as far as your universe. CBS/Paramount, on the other hand, is, showing a rather unfocused, just more or less your standard studio relationship with directors. And this is exactly what's caused some of the problems with the DCEU, is that you have executives in these companies that don't know the product that they're producing. And that's the thing, is that if you look at over on the Disney side of things, they have Kevin Feige running the Marvel universe. I can't remember the lady's name, but the one lady that runs Lucasfilm, and so she's head of the Star Wars universe. With these two individuals running their individual universes, you have people that know the product in charge of the product, instead of executives that are just like, hey, what are the kids liking these days? Let's make a movie about it, which is what you're getting out of Paramount, CBS, Fox, and everybody else. So
I'm hip. That. I'm with the hip kids.
Oh, what are the kids hip to these days? So we'll give it to them on the big screen. And by the way, Discovery is a perfect example of that. Why did they throw the F word into Discovery? Why did they throw Klingon boobs into Discovery? Because they thought that that's what people want, right? What the network doesn't think you want? Intelligent Star Trek stories. Because you know what? If they thought that's what you wanted, that's what they would be putting out there. And so, that's honestly, that's just the truth of it. Is that the studios are giving you exactly what they think, because the studios aren't, their goal is to make money. They want you to come in and give your money, or in the case of television shows, give your attention, so that the commercial, they can raise the premium on commercials for their programming, and make money off the deal. Well, right. If you're not, if they put out a bunch of crap that nobody wants to see, guess what? They're not going to make money. So they don't want to put out things that people don't want to see. The problem is they're with your typical career executive, they don't understand what people genuinely want. They just know what people tell them people want. And they don't understand, they're not artists, they're executives. And so Kevin Feige, and a lot of people don't realize this, Kevin Feige worked on, I believe it's 13 Marvel-related films before the MCU ever started. So a lot of those older movies, for example, the X-Men films, the Spider-Man films, the Blade films, the Ghost Rider films, Kevin Feige, look in the credits, is in those credits. It's like an associate producer and stuff like that. He knows these products. Plus, he had, he worked for Marvel proper for a long time. So you have a guy who absolutely knows the Marvel Comics universe.
Right.
The lady at Lucasfilm, she's been there since, like the late 80s or something. I mean, she's been at Lucasfilm forever too. She knows Star Wars. You need that kind of relationship with your producers. Right now, over at Paramount, J.J. Abrams, obviously not a Trekkie, and that's no secret. The Paramount executives, the CBS executives, I don't think they know anything about Star Trek, because you know what, that's why they keep trying to make Star Trek more like Star Wars. By the way, that person's back in the chat.
I got
him. And the Star Wars, Star Trek thing, people see, oh, Star Wars made a lot of money, so let's make Star Trek more like Star Wars. No! That's the stupid thing to do. That's like the same problem that we get with Marvel and DC. One of the problems that Justice League had was, this is DC's attempt to be more like Marvel. That's a stupid thing to do.
Right. And what someone asked, they're different genres, they're done differently, so how can you compare? We can at least talk about how we enjoy them and how they're being ran. And I worry for the future of DC, honestly, and of Trek. And I wonder if Trek has played its part. If we're at a point that maybe we've told the stories that need to be told for it.
Right.
Simply because it doesn't seem like we're having any real it feels like they're milking it until it dies. It feels like a Nemesis moment to me, because I think I firmly believe that Nemesis was a cash grab more than anything else. And it feels like it's just a cash grab, whereas Marvel and even Star Wars feel like they're still telling stories. And I just wonder if maybe Trek has run its course.
Basically, by definition, every movie ever made is a cash grab.
Sure.
Because every movie, the intent is to make money. However, where the where the problem that we run into is whether or not the way, what you're thinking of is, hey, what product can we put out there that people will plunk money for, which can work in some cases, versus what is a universe we can build around that's going to keep people coming back over and over and over, which is what Marvel has done so effectively and what Lucasfilm has done so effectively. And so, yeah, because, it's funny because a lot of the critics of the Marvel films try to say that every movie is the exact same film. And they'll sit there and show how, for example, the Doctor Strange, you can take a lot of plot points from Doctor Strange, put it side by side with plot points from Iron Man, and realize, oh, well, yeah, there's a lot of similarities here. You had a rich douchebag who ended up, badly injured and had to deal with his own arrogance and become a hero, and all this, and then ends up fighting an evil version of himself. That's
right.
But and so people talk about the Marvel formula. Oh, thank you. Yeah, Kathleen Kennedy. Thank you. She's the one that runs Lucasfilm. But the Marvel, it's not that, there's, Star Trek doesn't have any more stories to tell. Are you kidding? You could tell, you could sit there, you really could, if you had a good creative team behind it. Throw away Star Trek Discovery for a second. Let's just do, we'll call it, Star Trek Reimagined, the new series that we're putting together because CBS just handed us a dump truck full of money. We take state-of-the-art, modern, JJ-type special effects and redo, just hire some good, decent screenwriters to rewrite every single one of the original 79 episodes of Star Trek. And you know what? It would be a huge hit.
And you know what? A lot of people want post-Dominion War.
But you know what? Look at the Orville. Okay? The Orville is telling stories that we've seen on the original Star Trek and Star Trek The Next Generation. Right. And granted, they're doing some new things with it, but they are telling classic Trek stories. And guess what? Orville is awesome. And it's not because, and it certainly isn't because, Orville is, purest family-friendly entertainment, because it's a little raunchy.
Sure.
It's not as raunchy as some of the stuff we've seen on Discovery, but also the raunchiness on Orville is kind of a natural part of the story, as opposed to it just feeling like you're throwing something in for no particular reason.
Right. Now, to be fair, I'm not saying it's going to be this way with Discovery. To be fair, most every first season of Trek ever has sucked pretty badly. Yes. So Discovery has a chance to pull itself up.
Sure. The end of the first half of season 1 was much better than the beginning.
Oh, yeah, by far. It did seem like they were getting better. There were a couple episodes that felt like a step back, but for the most part, it felt like they were getting a lot better. They were moving forward, especially when they treated it as ensemble as God intended. I think Star Wars is doing well. Do you think DC is going to be able to pull it out, or ultimately they're just going to get out of the movie business?
I don't think they're going to get out of the movie business, but I think that a reboot is in order. But the only real question is, will DC, particularly Warner Brothers, be smart enough to actually not only do a reboot, but do it in such a way that they get somebody that's going to run this universe like a Kevin Feige.
Sure. I think it's Flashpoint. I may be wrong on this. You know this better than me, but
Flashpoint,
I heard they may be trying to do a reboot, especially with Batman, because Ben Affleck is apparently on his way out with Flashpoint.
Yeah,
is what I've heard. I don't know how true that is, but that's what I've heard.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about that because of and the main reason for that is I assume you don't know the Flashpoint story.
Yeah, I do. In fact, okay. I don't know it 100%, but you and Tim have talked about it a lot. So, because it's Tim's favorite.
Yeah, it's a great story. I mean, because Flash, one of the defining things about Flash's character is that his mom was murdered when he was a kid, and he didn't get there in time. And he's always been obsessed, and obviously, superheroes tend to have some kind of irony to their powers versus their personality, but that's a big thing about Barry Allen is he was not on time to save his mom, and now he's the fastest man alive.
Right.
But Flash in Flashpoint, Flash realizes that since he can run so fast that he can literally run back in time, that hey, why not just go back and save mom?
Right.
And so he does. He does exactly that. He goes back and saves his mom so that she's not murdered. And then when he comes back to the present, well, mom's there, but everything else has completely fallen apart.
Right.
And so Bruce Wayne, for example, did not survive that fateful night in Gotham. Instead, Bruce was killed, and his father becomes Batman.
And doesn't the mother become Joker or something like that?
No, it depends.
Or is that
I don't?
That's a different one.
You're thinking of like Injustice,
right?
But the whole thing is the timeline is completely screwed up, and so then Flash has to figure out how to go back and fix it. And so one concept that people have been batting around, and it's mostly just fans that I think are desperate for an in-universe solution. Is the idea that, hey, if they make a Flashpoint movie, they could then have an explanation for Flash changing the timeline and then recasting everybody, retooling the whole universe and starting over again.
Right.
And that would, while that could work, honestly, I don't think that's a good idea. I think they need to just scrap what they've got. I know that a lot of particularly SJWs think that Wonder Woman is the greatest film ever made, but just scrap the entire universe and start from scratch. You don't need an in-universe explanation because your universe failed. And it's time. Sony did not sit there and say, "Hey, why don't we come up with a story reason why Tobey Maguire turned into Andrew Garfield?"
Right.
No, you just start over.
You don't think, wouldn't that kill it to a degree? You don't think that, you think it'd be okay? I understand what you just said, but still, it kind of seems like, I don't know.
Well, they rebooted Spider-Man, twice in a decade. And guess what? It's doing pretty well right now.
Well, some of them did. Some of them didn't do so hot, to be fair.
No, I said now it's doing
that's true. That's true.
And so, they misfired twice, but third time's the charm.
Right.
And now, granted, they can't do one of the things that was one of the big fixes was that now Spider-Man is part of the MCU,
Right.
Because they can't obviously put Superman and Batman in the MCU, as awesome as that would be. But but what they can do is just simply say, you know what, we need to cut our losses. This was a bad idea. I'm getting pounded here, and I can't target it.
Well, run for it. Escape. I'm looking at some of these fancy ships because we're getting ready to get off of here. So I'm letting people see this ship. I'm looking at a ship that reminds me of Babylon 5.
Right.
But, so anyway, no, I mean, like, the ship looks like a Babylon 5 ship. And I know where the ship comes from before people start getting mad at me about it. All right, so I think we're going to be towards the end of it, guys. If you haven't, go to the community tab. If you want to see an in-depth analysis, especially more about what we just talked about with the Prime Directive versus Oh, wow. Now I'm getting attacked by these little things. I was looking at this dude, and I guess now he sent his friends after me. Or, I don't know, swarming. They're like babies. I got little babies on my here. Look at those little babies. Don't know what the hell he just did to me. Anyway, wow. So if you want to see the Prime Directive, then definitely go vote for it. Or I can do a breakdown of Operation Return. That'll be 4 or 5 different episodes. We'll talk about how they were losing, how they decided to do the attack, things like that. I will be doing both. It's just one of them is going to be done this week. Definitely next Sunday show up, because we have partnered with Perfect World going forward for the next 4 Sundays. We're going to see how it goes. Well, except for New Year's and Christmas. We'll do the Sundays after that. But I'll be having giveaways, Star Trek Online. If you'd like to be a part of my fleet, definitely go and join our Discord. It'll be in the description. And Wednesday is the Geek Breakdown. I'm going to be doing some changes to that. A lot of Patreon stuff going to be doing there as well. And all of the dumbest comments I can think of and see, or good questions that keep coming up, I'll be featuring them on the Geek Breakdown. Guys, don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe. And I'm going to see you on the next Lore Reloaded. By the way, if you're watching this and you want to comment, tell me what the hell this guy did to me. I got these little baby type things. I don't know what the hell they are. But
don't forget, everybody needs to petition. Yes, Laura's going to be getting a Michael Burnham tattoo.
That's true. Oh, that's right. With 10,000, I will be getting a tattoo. It will be live streamed.
It will not be Michael Burnham's face.
It will definitively not be that.
Michael Burnham's face on your butt.
I can tell you, it won't be that for sure. But yeah, thank you guys so much. This channel couldn't thrive without you guys. So it's really appreciated. It's really fun, and I'm gonna keep doing this just to make you happy, because I do it for you guys. That's why I do it, because I love you. I love all of you.
Very sincere.
No, it is. It's very sincere.